Veteran British anti-corruption crusader Lord Peter Hains has come out guns blazing to call for a ban on public sector contracts for global consultancies linked to state capture in South Africa. Lord Hains told the House of Lords this week that a law to consolidate and reform the UK's public procurement system should include provisions to allow the government to explicitly bar companies such as Bain Co from tendering for public sector contracts. Bain Company's name came up for scrutiny during South Africa's recently concluded state capture inquiry, and the US consultancy recently scored a multi-million-pound government contract in the UK. Lord Peter Hains joins us now to share his perspective on the matter. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
The public procurement bill, how should we understand it in relation to your submission at the House of Lords on Monday?
Well, I moved 2 amendments at the committee stage of the procurement bill. It's designed to lay out a new framework for government to have contracts, tenders with outside organizations, including, obviously, global corporates like Bain Company. And I pressed for the government to accept new criteria which said that any company which had operated unlawfully or unethically, including abroad, as Bain Company did in South Africa, and were condemned by the Zondo Commission and recommended for prosecution because of their terrible role in the President Zuma state capture corruption decade. That was designed to say to the British government, you should now refuse to give Bain any public contracts until the prosecutorial process in South Africa's gone through its whole procedure, and the company is then found guilty or innocent. But the condemnation from the Zondo Commission was so heavy-handed, so clear, that I don't think there's any doubt about a verdict. Why I think this is important is because these companies, which are global brand names, without which Zuma and the Guptas would not have been able to loot and money launder abroad on the prodigious scale that they did, these global corporates have got to feel the heat that there is a penalty to pay if they operate in this unlawful way.
You speak of these corporates feeling the heat, and you characterize Bain's shockingly shady behavior in South Africa as just the tip of the iceberg?
Yes, and I then went to see Jacob Rees-Mogg, the minister at the Cabinet Office responsible for public procurement policy, to ask him specifically to exclude Bain. I'd previously written to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, 6 months ago, and had no real positive response, and indeed a certain amount of civil service kind of just hand-wringing and not and sitting on their hands as well as wringing them at the same time. So I went to see him, raised it in the House of Lords again, went to see him, and it was a better meeting than I'd expected. I took Athol Williams, the brave whistleblower who was a senior Bain partner for a long time, for many, many decades. And he told the truth about what was going on and was punished by the company and hounded out of the country for his bravery. So I took Athol Williams, who knows a lot about the detail, with me, and I thought it was a much more positive meeting with Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg than, frankly, I'd been expecting, but we'll see what he does. But I think this is part of a wider story, which I think you're asking me to point to, which is no global corporate should be able to behave in this way and expect that its reputation internationally will not be damaged.
Absolutely. You rang the alarm and you say that what happened in South Africa should serve as a warning for the United Kingdom. We understand that Bain was recently awarded a multi-million-pound UK government contract. Does it seem that this warning is being heeded?
Not so far. And, you know, the government here in the UK talks the talk on corruption and money laundering, says it is terrible, says they will not, that they will prohibit it and so on. But here it comes a practical example of a company which may not have committed corrupt acts in South Africa, but certainly did may not have committed corrupt acts in the United Kingdom, which is where I'm focusing on the United Kingdom government to walk the walk and not just talk the talk on its anti-corruption policy, but certainly did in South Africa. So I think whether it's the United States government in Washington or whether it's the British government in London, they've got to actually put their money where their mouth is and say to these companies, look, you're welcome to do business with us, but you've got to obey the law, not just here in the UK or the US, but in any country across the world. Otherwise, there will be consequences for you. Now, what Jacob Rees-Mogg told me is that he has the power under existing legislation, without my amendments, to exclude Bain & Company if he chose to do so. I wait to see what decision he makes.
Lord Hain, is it safe to say or safe to conclude from our conversation and what I'm hearing from you is that corruption is not something that is merely endemic to South Africa or African countries? It is something that we see all over the world. We're not the exception to the rule. Does not make it right, though.
No, it certainly doesn't. But you're not exception to the rule, but South Africa's had a particularly bad dose of it. And it's still continuing, frankly, despite President Ramaphosa's intentions to stop it. And despite the fact that arrests have been made of leading ANC figures and others, it is still continuing. So in South Africa, and it's certainly continuing abroad. I mean, the money laundering dimension to corruption, which is where they take the money out of the country, hide it, bring it back in sometimes, that is being estimated at $2 trillion US dollars, $2 trillion US dollars. You multiply by 20 roughly and you'd see what it would be in rand a year, right across the world. And we've seen instances of corruption during COVID here in Britain, with ministers handing out contracts to mates. So you know all about that in South Africa, where it was so transparent and brazen. So it's got to be dealt with. But here I'm particularly focusing and saying the British government can now make an example of Bain & Company by saying, because you acted unlawfully in South Africa, you cannot get government contracts here in the UK until you clean up your act, until the law has taken its course in respect to the prosecution recommended by Zondo. And once you have, and you're at the other end of that, well, then you can apply for government contracts again. They've got to be made to understand that there are penalties to be paid for their unlawful behaviour in South Africa or elsewhere in the world.
Veteran British anti-corruption fighter Lord Peter Hain of the British House of Lords. Thank you.